There we go. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the October 9th Clean Water Board meeting. I'm going to hand it over to our board chairman in a moment. Before we dive in, I just wanted to orient folks to Microsoft Teams meeting platform. We're holding this meeting through Microsoft Teams. There's also a call-in option. If anyone needs to utilize that, we can drop that information in the chat. When you are on this Microsoft Teams meeting, we're recording it currently, and a recording will be posted later this week. And if you hover over the 3-dot symbol in your Teams meeting, it'll open up your meeting options. And there you'll be able to find under your settings an option to turn on live captions if anybody would find closed captioning helpful to follow along during the meeting. There will also be closed captions available on the recording that we post following the meeting. And in addition to turning on closed captions, just want to make sure folks are available of the small camera symbol. If you click that, it turns on your camera. The microphone symbol, if you toggle that on and off, it mutes and unmutes. And then there's also oops, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm just going to make sure. Okay. Here we go. And there's a raise hand button. That's the hand symbol. And if you click that, it will raise your hand and we can call upon you. And that will be an important function for folks to be aware of when we get to the public comment portion of the agenda. So that's a quick tutorial of Teams meeting functions. Please feel free to drop a note in the chat if at any point anyone's having technical difficulties, and we'll do our best to help you out. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the Clean Water Board Chair, Doug Farnham, to kick us off, and we will share our screen of the agenda for today's meeting. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. As Emily said, I'm Doug Farnham. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer for the Agency of Administration. Wearing a couple of hats right now, but let's go through the agenda. First off, we're going to review the process of the constructing the 2025 fiscal year budget. Then we're going to go into the operating statement with Nick Kramer. We'll then move into the clean water budget recommendation for FY25. And then the previewing of the public comment plan. So notice that one is more of a short period. It's a preview. Then we'll have a quick update on the availability of federal funds for water quality work from Neil Kamen. And then we'll have a 15-minute public comment period. And then after public comment, so again, sorry, one thing in public comment, we will generally go through people that have, indicated they would like to comment first, and we'll go through that list of anyone who signed up to comment, and then we'll open it up. And like Emily said, generally use the raise hand function. And if people are on a phone or something where they're going to have more difficulty raising the hand, usually we'll move into a part where people can speak up if they are unable to use that function. And then we will, the board will discuss and approve the FY25 budget, posting it and to post and start that public comment period. Then we'll move into adjournment. So that's our overall agenda today. And just as a reminder, we have our February 22nd meeting minutes on our consent agenda. So barring any comment from members of the board, we'll consider those adopted. So, Emily, do you want to take it forward from here, or should I just pass it straight to Gianna?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we can pass it straight over to Gianna. And in the meantime, I will just drop a few links in the chat if anyone would like to access these meeting materials directly from the webpage. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gianna Petito, who's our program's grant supervisor. Thank you, Gianna.
Great, thank you. And can you hear me okay with my mask on?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm briefly going to walk through the process for developing the state fiscal year 25 clean water budget. This is a slide that's also in the meeting materials packet for today. It's on page 4 of your meeting materials. The pages are denoted on the bottom right in green fonts because there's multiple page numbers sometimes. So please refer to the green font on the bottom right, and page 4, you'll see this slide. State fiscal year 2025 starts next July 2024. And as you can see, the budget process takes a full year to develop from this current July 2023 all the way until next July 2024, when we're able to start implementing the budget. Highlighted in the orange square here, rectangle here, is where we are right now, the first Clean Water Board meeting of the budget year, to hopefully review and improve the draft state fiscal year 25 budget and public comment materials to be able to launch and bring those forward to the public comment period. There's a few changes to the slide. The board has seen this in the past, but just to highlight some changes for you all. These boxes are now color coded for the action of certain entities so that you can better reference who's responsible for these activities. So yellow indicates an action of the emergency board. Gray indicates an action of the administration or state agencies. Green indicates actions of the Clean Water Board, and blue indicates actions of the legislature. Additionally, what's new this year is we've taken the full clean water budget cycle from beginning to end, from when we first receive a consensus revenue forecast past July to when the agencies receive spending authority next July to help people carry through the understanding of the full year of budgeting. So I'll briefly walk through this process for anyone that's new to it. Starting again in this past July, we received a consensus revenue forecast update for the state fiscal year 2025, and the agency administration has helped us put that into an operating statement for Clean Water Fund. Since July, the interagency work group has been building a draft clean water budget for state fiscal year 2025, which is being presented today to the full board for review. After today's meeting, we'll be launching the public comment period from October 20th through November 20th. I do want to draw your attention to the public hearing that we scheduled for November 2nd. We do request board attendance there to listen to the public comment in live action theater there. At the end of the public comment period, we'll be preparing the public comments for board review. The board will reconvene in early December 5th, to consider the public comment, and then hopefully finalize and approve the recommendations for state fiscal year 2025. Once that budget is recommended by the board, it goes over to the agency of administration for integration into the full budget that the governor proposes to the legislature. So in January, the governor presents the full budget to the legislature. And then from January to April, the legislature reviews the budget and takes testimony. Jumping over to the next blue box, hopefully around May, the legislature approves the budget for the fiscal year. And then next July, we start the fiscal year and the agencies receive spending authority to implement the budget. During that same time frame, while the budget is under legislative review from January to May, the board meets again in February. And this is to reconsider the updated forecast for the revenue that might be coming in next fiscal year for the Clean Water Fund. And that's, again, the e-board meets to update their consensus revenue forecast, and the agency of administration helps us update the operating statement for the Clean Water Fund. So this pending February meeting will be reviewing what the updated revenue forecast will be for the Clean Water Fund, along with what the governor ultimately proposed as a budget to the legislature in January, and then addressing some other outstanding items that need attention, which includes finalizing the contingency risk reserve plan and the recommendations water quality trading report. Any questions on the process? And with that, do I pass it back to you, Emily, or over to our colleague, Nick Kramer?
Sure. Yeah, Nick, thank you for covering the operating statement. That's up next. I can share screen if that's helpful for you of the operating statement.
That would be great, Emily. Yeah, if you've got it. Thank you. So hey, folks, I'm here in the room. I'm like a Teams vampire sometimes. The camera doesn't seem to want to pick me up, but I exist. I promise. So yeah, Nick Kramer. I'm from the Department of Finance and Management, housed within the Agency of Administration. So yeah, thank you, Emily. It looks like the document in question is up on the screen. That's great. So yeah, I'm gonna take a second and run through this. I mean, for those of you on the call who don't lull yourself to sleep at night reading operating statements, I think these things can be a little intimidating to look at, but they're pretty straightforward. So I'll start with sort of the high level summary. I think the headlines of this operating statement are really that the Clean Water Fund is no exception to the broad macroeconomic trends that we're seeing across state funds. I'll get into exactly what those are in a second, but in short, you know, if you had to bullet this, it's basically we were level in FY23, projections slightly down in FY24 and FY25. And some of those kind of balance each other out, and we'll get into that. But so I'm going to start, kind of trying to follow the cursor here. If you look at the leftmost orange column, it says January 2023 revenue update in BAA. What all the orange columns on this spreadsheet represent is the best information that this body had the last time it met. So Gianna walked through sort of the annual process. This body last met in February, following the January e-board forecast update. So those three orange columns represent what we knew at that point in time. So looking at the far leftmost column, just focusing on FY23, that's the fiscal year that we just ended, June 30th. At this time in February, we were anticipating about $10.3 million in clean water surcharge revenue, about 2.9 in abandoned bottle deposits or sheets, and about 13.9 in meals and rooms tax. And those are the three major components that make up the Clean Water Fund, right? Continuing down that same column, you can see all of the base appropriations itemized by agency, DEC, ACCD, et cetera. There's this subtotal base appropriations, which I'll call like a preliminary total. That's because this is a Clean Water Fund operating statement, and there's a slight intricacy in that actually agricultural clean water appropriations, although they show up in the overall budget as just clean water appropriations, those actually go through a separate state fund. So for the purposes of this operating statement, those show as transfers out of the fund below on like lines Z and AA, et cetera. So I skipped over the one-time appropriations because there were none in FY23, but if you go down, you can see there was an agricultural transfer of about 5.8 million, a transfer to the Lakes in Crisis Fund. Clean water regulars will know that's a topic of some discussion always. And so you can see on lines A, E, there's sort of the current year unallocated, unreserved. That's kind of like the bottom line for that year. If you add all of the total appropriations on line X with the total transfers on line AD and subtract that from your revenue, which was way back up on line G, that gives you kind of the bottom line for that year. Then there's the contingency reserve. That's just a statement of fund balance that will go up in FY24. But so then you take that bottom line from line AE, that current year unallocated, unreserved, and you add it to whatever prior year fund balance there may have been. So this is all the way down on AG. You can see the prior year fund balance was 10.8 million. Add the surplus from FY23 of 1.3, and we were projecting, this is again as of February, about a $12.1 million total bottom line at the end of FY23 for the Clean Water Fund. So that's how the columns are all laid out. They're all pretty similar. So I'll move a little bit more quickly now, working our way to the right. You can see the next column over is the actuals for FY23. So really the only piece that's changed there is we've had a July e-board meeting with updated revenue forecasts. Those are reflected in the blue way to the like July 2023 revenue update, et cetera. These actuals are the actual funds received to the Clean Water Fund. So money in the bank, so to speak. And you can see clean water surcharge, that's down from projections, 10.3 down to 9.1. I'm skipping down to bottle of sheets. You can see that's up from 2.9 to 3.5. And meals and rooms tax, is also slightly up at 14.2. So I think the point I want to stress on the actuals for FY23 is that if that was it, and we were only booking surcharge, sheets, and meals and rooms, the fund would have actually ended slightly under projections. So in terms of the sort of stable revenue that we count on, this was a bit of a contraction. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that there's this $1.5 million interest income piece that helped to put us back up above target. That is really atypical, that interest. That's a feature of both the high interest rate environment that we have been experiencing in the country, thanks to our friends at the Federal Reserve, and the fact that the state has been sitting on kind of unprecedented amounts of cash in our accounts. And so the Clean Water Fund, like many other state funds this year, really benefited from those two pieces of information. And so the Clean Water Fund booked about 1.5 million, which for context in FY22, I think we booked about $100,000. So it's up pretty significantly, and that was really a saving grace. So if you track that increase, so you look at the total sources, we went up slightly from 27.2 million to 28.5. That trickles down all the way down. All of the base appropriations, transfers, et cetera, are unchanged. And so that current year unallocated unreserved number on line AE was up from 1.3 to about 2.6. And then that in turn impacts the sum with the prior year unreserved. So our actual bottom line in FY23 is about 13.4. So that's FY23, pausing there for a breath and just to let that sink in. FY24, I'll take kind of both columns at once because I think now we get it. You can see the clean water surcharge estimate has dropped pretty significantly from what we were thinking last time we met. It was from 9.1 to 7.9. Skipping down to the sheets, that number is up. I'm going to revisit that in a sec because that's actually a methodological change being proposed by yours truly. So I'll speak to that in a minute. Meals and rooms tax is pretty steady, up slightly from prior estimate. And then you'll notice there's a reversions figure in there of $100,000. That's money that was appropriated to the agency of administration that has been being carried forward for several years. So this year, as part of the carry forward review process, we're proposing to revert that back to the fund.
Nick, can I ask a question?
Yes, Julie.
Why there's no interest income anticipated for FY24?
Yeah.
Since we still have a fairly significant, I assume our interest income is somehow related to the unallocated, unreserved bottom line balance in the Clean Water Fund?
It is, yeah. So historically, that's been, I think, a pretty de minimis amount. And so we just have chosen to ignore it. It's a good point, and it's something if the board was interested, I think we could work on calculating. It's a little bit hard to nail down at any given point what the fund balance is going to be because a lot of inflows and outflows. And this, bear in mind, this is an appropriations basis statement, so showing sort of spending authority accumulated, and the actual fund balance really varies quite a bit. So it's a non-trivial task to calculate. It may be that there's a significant amount of interest. It may be as some of this money starts moving through the state's coffers. We can't really bank on it. So I think that's probably a board level decision, but
okay, it's a request we could make.
We could
Okay.
certainly take a look at that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no, good question. So again, moving down the columns for FY24, really the only change between last time and now in terms of the appropriations, an astute reader of this document might notice that there's about $93 million or $93,000, sorry, that transferred from one time into base. That was an action of the legislature. That's money that was associated with I think a position, a limited service position within FPR that they decided to transfer into the base. So the total of 21.8, this is on line X of all appropriations in FY24 is unchanged. Agriculture transfers, lakes in crisis, moving down, those are the same as last we met. That line AE, current year unallocated unreserved, is up slightly, or well, down slightly, sorry, since those are negative numbers, from negative 4.3 million, which is what we were budgeting last time, to a little under 4.6 million currently. So when that number is negative, it means you're essentially banking on eating into your prior year unreserved, unallocated, and you can see below those sort of final rows of each column. We were anticipating having 12.1, of which we were going to eat 4.3. Now we have 13.4, of which we're going to eat 4.6, for a final projected FY24 ending balance in the Clean Water Fund of $8.8 million. Pausing there just slightly again, then FY25 is similar. We actually didn't have appropriations last time since that's the budget that's currently being developed. So you'll notice a big blank space there. We did have initial revenue projections, 8.8 in the clean water surcharge, 2.9 in the sheets, and 14.5 for meals and rooms. You can see the clean water surcharge is down again pretty significantly from 8.8. The sheets are slightly up again due to the methodological change I'll talk about in a second. And meals and rooms continues its sort of inexorable slow rise. So pretty steady, but up slightly. For an overall revenue estimate in FY25, that's down about $600,000 to 25.7. And then of that, we are planning to spend, based on the current proposed FY25 budget that will be discussed in more detail today, about 20.8 million in base appropriations. There's about 3.6 in one-time appropriations for 24.5 total. Add into that a $9 million ag transfer, an $120,000 Lakes in Crisis Fund transfer, and you get a current year, again, that's that line AE, unallocated unreserved of negative 7.8 million. Again, that's sort of eating away from prior year surplus, which, like I just said, we are currently projecting to be $8.8 million. So you subtract 7.8 from 8.8, and you're left with a little bit under $1 million in sort of cushion or buffer, you could think of, depending on, keeping in mind, of course, that the end of FY25 is June 30th, 2025. So quite a ways of time. Eons really in forecasting land. So lots to change between now and then. And then lastly, the last column on this sheet is just a look out, again, even further ahead to FY26, but based on the latest eBoard updated forecast, those are the revenue numbers we're anticipating. So that's it for the clean water operating statement. I guess while I'm continuing to talk at you, I'll just say my piece before we have any questions. So I highlighted that the sheets line starting in FY24, you can see there's an increase from what we had anticipated, which was 2.9 million to about 3.4. And that's because prior to our methodology for estimating sheets, we didn't really have a lot of data. It's not something that the Clean Water Fund has been taking in for very long. I think starting in 2019 was the first year based on legislative change. So looking at the data in 2019 and 2020, we had some sort of anomalously low years. I think one of them was maybe even just a half year of collection that we're pulling the average we use to calculate those numbers down. I looking back at history, what would happen if instead of taking the running average of all years of data of a sheet collection, we just took a running average of the last 3. And the impact you'll see there is about an increase of about $500 million. $500,000.
If you'd just like to find us $500 million, then.
Oh, you're scaring me. I can try, but yeah. Matter is zeros, right? So this is really a board judgment call. I think if you look back at our actuals, I mean, it doesn't go back past 2023 on this sheet. We've been running about $3.5 million a year in abandoned bottle deposits. So it feels like a reasonably comfortable methodological switch, to me, at least in my opinion, such as it is. And I've discussed this with the tax department with whom I collaborate on this quite a bit, and they seem to think it was also a reasonable assumption. But this is not an action that, of course, I could take unilaterally. So this is really an item, I think, for further board discussion. I think Emily and Doug jump in if I'm getting this wrong, but I think the idea is that we're discussing these operating statements today. The board can sit and chew on this for the next month until the next meeting, and then this will be part of the consent agenda moving forward. So if anybody has any objections or would like to have further discussion about that switch, there should be an opportunity for that. But am I getting that right, Emily, Doug?
Yes, I believe that is the plan. And so the next board meeting where this would show up is the December board meeting on the consent agenda, so that this is more regularly a point of board reflection and decision making, where in the past the operating statement was really more of an educational tool or a tracking tool.
Great. So, and there's a lot more context. So I think I've talked probably long enough. I'm certainly happy to follow up with anybody one-on-one or offline if there's questions about the methodological change or any piece of this operating statement. But I'll defer to Emily on time. I'm happy to answer any questions, any burning questions right now on this, if it's helpful.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First is just want to confirm my understanding that the way we read this statement is that $2.5 million contingency reserve is in addition to the unallocated, unreserved line amount shown on AI. Is that so that effectively we have
Correct.
That's correct.
about $3.5 million of buffer.
So, yeah.
Okay. And then the other one is just back to this interest income. I suspect it's more than zero. I also don't want to do a lot of make work. But maybe it's just something we figure into sort of how much we're comfortable leaving on the bottom line, is assuming there's going to be some amount that's likely greater than zero and less than 1.5 million in interest income that we are in all likelihood gonna realize at some point here. I guess, do you have a sense when that would come, since I guess we're in FY 24.
Yeah.
So is this something that we wouldn't know or even be able to easily like ballpark until the end of the fiscal year? Or is this something that come January, we may have a reasonable estimate without making a lot of work for you?
It's a good question. I don't think it would make a lot of work for me, Julie. I mean, I'm typically made aware of the total interest bookings at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
I assume that it's being received by the treasurer's office and is trackable on an interim basis. So if that were a point of interest from the board to see how we're doing, I think I could ping somebody. I mean, to your point, I think thinking about it globally, if the board does choose to adopt an increase in the abandoned bottle estimate,
Right, we're already taking one.
There's sort of some steps forward away from fiscal conservatism. You could see this as a step staying in a more conservative approach to say, yeah, well, we're not really sure what the interest will be, but we know it's out there. So that's obviously all at the board's discretion, but.
That's an interesting way to frame it, and sort of do this one step at a time as opposed to multiple steps in the same, yeah. Got it. Thank you. Those were my questions.
Nick and I did look back at prior operating statements, and I think the interest earned is usually in the $100,000 to $140,000 ballpark per year, and we typically learn that at the close of a fiscal year. So I really think it is the balance we're carrying of unallocated, unreserved that is resulting in this boost, plus the high interest rates Nick already spoke to. And so we could kind of look at that as maybe a one-time boost, but not likely to continue into the future as we continue to really spend down that unallocated, unreserved balance and program it to line items.
Again, I'll just emphasize that.
The conference room just got muted. I think. We heard Nick say, I'll just emphasize. Okay, now we can hear you.
I don't know why.
Can you hear me now? This
Yes.
is probably killing you all. What I was gonna emphasize, and I think I did pretty eloquently, change it to redo it, is, that just the difference between the unallocated and reserve that shows on the operating statement, which is an appropriations basis, basically tracking to spending authority versus like the fund balance, which is actual money in the fund. So just to give a really ridiculous, hyperbolic example that would illustrate it, if every program that's reliant on clean water funds chose not to, get any money out the door until like June 25th of the year, that has a really different interest received than if they all got the money out the door the first day of the fiscal year, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with how long the funding is actually retained by the state and so how long it's earning interest. So that's part of, I think, what complicates the projections, right? Because a lot of it has to do with programmatic variables, like how quickly things are happening. But which is not to say it's impossible. It's certainly something we could.
Bob Flint has his hand raised. Bob?
Hi, everybody. So maybe I'm a simpleton, but it seems like the conversation is really about the clean water surcharge. And is it the purview of this board to look at how that's computed, or I don't know the right way to phrase this, or any tweaks that should be made to expand what's collected to make up the clean water surcharge? Is that within this board's authority to look at? Because otherwise you're just playing games with numbers on other line items.
The clean water surcharge is a property transfer tax, 0.2% on the property transfer tax. And frankly, it's about double what it was prior to COVID. When it was enacted, we were looking at $4 to $5 million a year. And so this is just, I think, it coming back down to earth after some pretty astronomical performance there as the real estate market burned really hot in Vermont.
And it gave a chance to kind of build up the reserves then in essence because of that.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this a little bit last year, but something to keep in mind is there is a sunset provision around the property transfer tax. For some reason, the legislature only has that in place for 10 years. And so I don't remember if it's FY26 or FY27, but it's set to expire. And I think that that's something that merits our continued attention because it is obviously a very important component of our overall funding portfolio.
Thank you. Yes, and I can drop a link to the statutory language for the Clean Water Board into the chat. And the board has the authority to review and approve an annual revenue estimate. But traditionally, we've really deferred to folks at Agency of Administration to compute that. And then the step of shifting this into the consent agenda helps to articulate that as a action item of the board, but still deferring to folks in Agency of Administration that have those expertise, which I think was part of your question, Bob, if that's helpful. Thank you. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Nick, for that overview. Helpful as always.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.
And I believe the next item on our agenda, Gianna Petito is going to walk us through an overview of the state fiscal year 2025 clean water budget recommendation. Thank you, Gianna.
Great, yeah, thank you for the introduction, Emily. So I'm going to talk to everyone about the full recommendation of the budget and as well as the drafting approach. So we'll start with the big picture full recommendation. So this is a bar chart showing the size of the clean water budget over time. And we're looking at, say, fiscal year 2025, which is the bar second to the right. So this shows that the clean water budget is coming in at just shy of $39.6 million this year. This graph for all of you is on page 11 of the meeting materials if you'd like to see it more closely. So again, the budget is coming in about $39.6 million. And that is about an $11 million drop compared to state fiscal year 2024. That's largely due to two components. One is the loss of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, which are shown on the bar chart in red / lines. That was expected. We were only given 3 years of American Rescue Plan Act dollars for the boards to assign across the clean water budget. And then you'll also notice that the yellow bar, which represents the capital bill, the clean water section of the capital bill, is just slightly smaller. It's shy of its $10 to $12 million average per year. It's more like $6 million this year. And so those two things in tandem get us to a roughly $11 million decrease from last fiscal year for the full budget size. What you can also see, though, is a quite large section of the bar, which is slashed blue lines, and this is the Clean Water Fund one-time funding. As Nick had mentioned before, and as you might recall from last year, the board had chosen to leave some unallocated, unreserved clean water funding on the bottom line to be programmed into state fiscal year 25, and that really served to buoy the full budget for this year. The budget sheet, which we'll go into a little bit later, does provide a lot more detail in the bottom right table of that sheet to compare state fiscal year 24 to 25 if you are interested. And then the last thing to refer you to is the final bar, which is the projected state fiscal year 2026 clean water budget. And this is building on the operating statement that Nick just presented on. So the solid blue is the projected clean water fund revenue as of the July board consensus revenue update. And the orange shows the projected capital bill contribution estimated to be back at the $10 million mark. And there is still that small blue slash line, which we'll talk a bit more about. But as Nick mentioned, a little bit of a leftover of the one-time funding of about $800,000 to $900,000 that's reflected in this projected budget. So again, just a snapshot of the numbers to orient you all. The full budget is just shy of $39.6 million, and that's made up of these different columns or dollar types. So the first is $25.8 million, and that is again coming from Nick's operating statement of what is the projected revenue for the Clean Water Fund in state fiscal year 2025. And then there's $6 million from the clean water section of the capital bill. And then there's about $7.8 million of unallocated, unreserved clean water fund dollars split into two different columns here. One is $4 million and one is 3.8. The $4 million is labeled to fill the capital bill funding gap. We'll talk more about explaining that. But again, the $6 million and the $4 million together will get you more to that average $10 million a year. And then the 3.8 is unallocated, unreserved clean water fund that's budgeted as one-time funds for the state fiscal year 25 budget. So now I'm going to dive into the drafting approach. We'll talk about what is the same from state fiscal year 2024, what's different, and some of the reasoning behind that, just to orient you all. We'll be using the budget sheet to talk through this, so you can refer to page 6 of the meeting materials for that. And if you're interested, page 17 of the meeting materials is where the narratives start to explain each of these line items and what they're funding. So if you want to learn more about each line item, you can refer there. So starting with what is the same from state fiscal year 2024, and I apologize for the really small font. So again, it's page 6 of the meeting materials. If you actually want to see the budget, I'm just sort of showing you how to read the budget sheet. So we're keeping with the ongoing set of line items and activities, and those are denoted here in the white columns. So the first column is just a line item number for easy reference. The second column shows the agency or the department that is going to be overseeing that line item or activity, and the third column is a brief title for the line item. We're continuing to organizing the budget into 3 priority tiers, 1, 2, 3, and then a 4th other in reflection of 10 VSA 1389. Prior to statutory prioritization given to the board. We're continuing to present the subtotals by tier over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, as well as by agency and department in the table below the main budget. And we're continuing in splitting the money between base funding, which is the green columns, and one-time funding, which is the blue columns. In the blue column, you'll see there's still an American Rescue Plan Act column just for reference to say fiscal year 24. But as we mentioned before, we're no longer, we no longer have dollars in the Clean Water Board process to assign. And so that is empty. So most of the one-time funding, or all the one-time funding, is coming from the Clean Water Fund unallocated, unreserved line. So briefly diving into the tiering, as a reminder, 10 BSA 1389 asked the board to prioritize different line items or activities. And the board has gone through the practice of interpreting prioritization by giving the majority of funding to tier 1 or highest priority items, a little bit less money to tier 2, and then less money to tier 3 and other. The board has been using a 60-30-10 ratio as a target to allocate the full budget across these tiers. And then this first pie chart on the top shows where the current clean water budget, where it shakes out in terms of this allocation. So while we're aiming for a 60-30-10 split across the tiers, the full budget actually looks more like 69% going to tier 1, 18% going to tier 2, 0 going to tier 3, and 13 going to some of the other line items. A huge reason for some of this deviation and lower funding to tier 2 and tier 3 in the clean water budget is that there's ongoing availability of federal funding going to tier 2 and tier 3 initiatives, specifically American Rescue Plan Act dollars and EPA money going through the Lake Champlain Basin program budgeting process. So because of that, to relieve some pressure on the clean water budget, those have a smaller proportion than the usual target. And then zooming in on the second pie chart, this shows if you took out the capital bill money, how the clean water fund money is apportioned. And you'll see a huge portion of that's really going towards tier 1, 80%, tier 2 gets 20%, and then tier 3 and other get no clean water fund dollars in this draft budget. And again, this is just to bring the clean water fund dollars in closer alignment with those statutory prioritization, because really that is referring to and talking about the clean water fund. And then as a reminder with what we mean by base funds or one-time funds, the base funding columns, the green columns, set target budgets based on ongoing program need and projected stable program growth, and to maintain non-federal match requirements to bring in ongoing core federal dollars. We split the base funding between capital and clean water fund in a strategic way that's been followed for many years now, which is to use the capital bill dollars in as few line items as possible for administrative purposes, to focus obviously on capital bill eligible activities and line items, and to push the capital bill dollars towards the lower tiered priorities, and to push the clean water fund money towards the higher tier or higher priority line items, just to be continuing to stay as close to statute and do as close to priorities as we can. And then the one-time funds, which was started last year in last year's budgeting process, was really to receive this large unallocated section of the operating statement and use it to provide some stability to the budget, understanding that there would be an expected contraction over the next few fiscal years. So we used it to really indicate or put it towards line items that were going to fill discrete or short-term gaps or replenish as needed line items to really help land the plane or to level out some of that contraction that we were understanding would come both from American Rescue Plan Act going away, but also as the economy is expected to settle out and the COVID pandemic post-pandemic boom was expected to settle out as well. So for those who are new to the budget or don't have a little bit of that history, as Nick referenced, last year the Clean Water Board faced about $10.8 million of unallocated unreserved funding. And that was mainly due to the actual revenue being much larger than forecasted. And the board very wisely decided not to use all of that in state fiscal year 24, to use some of it and to reserve some of it for state fiscal year 2025. So now this year the board has about 8.7, 8.8 of the budget, which is unallocated, unreserved, and most of that's being proposed in this current budget. across both the one-time funding and filling the capital gap. More of both of those pieces in just a bit. So what is new compared to last year for the budget? Well, excitingly, there are these gray columns to compare to state fiscal year 2024, both for base funding, one-time funding, and total, in case you would like a quick reference for the difference there. We're also, as you can see down at the very bottom of the one-time funding, there's about the $800,000, $900,000 balance that Nick referenced, that the full one-time unallocated unreserved is not currently being recommended to be assigned across the full budget. Some of the reasons for this being that the operating statements that the board has been viewing over the last few meetings have been trending downwards over time. And so recognizing that the current projection of 8.7, 8.8 is assuming that state fiscal year 24 revenues will operate as projected, but we're not entirely sure of that because state fiscal year 24 won't close until the end of next June. So given that there is a small balance there, just to be aware of. The other new thing is this column called filling the $4 million capital gap in base funds right here, and more on that in just a little bit. Surprise, more on that right now. Filling the $4 million capital bill gap. As you may be aware, the state of Vermont relies on a long-term annual commitment from the clean water section of the capital bill, usually in the range of $10 to $12 million. So the last few budgeting cycles, the board has recommended somewhere in the range of $10 to $12 million. And this is just an excerpt from statute that shows that the state has really committed to the Clean Water Initiative to fund it in the range of $50 to $60 million total, adjusted for inflation. And a portion of that is really sort of leaning on the capital bill to make full the $10 to $12 million appropriation. Now, the capital bill operates on a biennial basis. So this last legislative session, the legislature reviewed the board's state fiscal year 24 request for the capital bill, as well as made a recommendation for state fiscal year 2025. So the capital clean water section of the capital bill did allocate $6 million for the state fiscal year 2025 recommendation for the board to recommend. So there's a roughly $4 million base gap from the capital bill to sort of make all the needs whole, all the base funding whole, to make these line items whole. And so acknowledging, rather than putting in $10 million in this draft budget to re-recommend back to the legislature this session, the interagency recognizes there's probably a lot of anticipated needs on the capital bill and infrastructure needs as a result of the summer flooding that happened, the devastating flooding across Vermont. So instead, given the foresight of the board, we're able to meet this gap with the large amount of unallocated unreserved dollars. So we're using the $4 million from the unallocated unreserved line to fill this gap, and also calling it its own column in the budget to hopefully maintain the integrity of the state's long-term commitment to funding clean water. And then lastly, again, as mentioned before, because the filling the gap is a mixture of the Clean Water Fund, unallocated reserve balance, and actual capital bill dollars, the capital bill money, again, populates the lower tier or lower priority items, and then the Clean Water Fund money from the filling the gap populates some of the higher items that traditionally are covered by capital bill dollars. There are just a few line item updates to also draw your attention to, so I'll run through these four and then I can take any questions on all of this. The first is line 1.52 for program and partner support. You'll see compared to state fiscal year 2024, there's about a $300,000 increase in one-time funding being proposed for this line. This is being proposed to be set aside for potential flood recovery needs. The DEC has put together and deployed a flood verification survey to go out and find out what has happened to many of the clean water projects that we've been investing in over the last few years, and to find out what is the extent of the damages that have been sustained. Understanding that some may just need some maintenance, that's okay, but if a large proportion amount to repair needs, there may be some funding requests that come out of that, and this is proposed to help meet some of those needs in response to the flooding. Line 2.22, the Municipal Better Roads Program has a one-time $1 million recommendation. This is to support road erosion inventory reassessments. The municipal roads general permit was updated, and therefore the roads need to be reassessed to see if they meet the updated permit requirements. So VTrans has provided a conservative estimate of what this need might be, and so this draft budget proposes to cover some of those costs, but with the full, the remaining need either being met in future years or with other funding sources still to be determined. Line 2.4 in innovative and alternative technologies also has one-time funding for $750,000. This is to partially support an alum treatment pending the results of a feasibility study and permitting. So some of you may recall that in state fiscal year 24, which we're currently in, the board approved some funding to this line item that's being used actively right now to implement an alum feasibility study. And we're pending the results of that study. Should the study be recommending that? Should the program recommend, like the Ponds program and Watershed Management Division recommend it? And should the permitting be feasible? Some of this money is being recommended to be put aside to help with implementing that treatment. And we're also recommending to local partners to fill the rest of the funding gap with either local funding opportunities or financing opportunities. And then finally, line 4.3, the Better Connections and Downtown Transportation Fund, just flagging here that this remains zero. Last year, there was a recommendation to have a one-time pause. Given that there's continued to be a balance in that initiative and leftover funding from prior years, we're continuing to recommend the pause, which will be reevaluated in state fiscal year 26. And I think that concludes the summary of the budget overview and line items. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Gianna.
Perfectly on that.
Um,
Right on time.
Doug, would you like to focus first on any questions from the Clean Water Board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do questions from the board first.
And I see Dan, thank you for joining. I see you have your hand up. So we'll just start with board question discussion, then we can answer clarifying questions from the public. Thank you. Thank you, Gianna. Okay, not hearing any. Would you like to open it up for questions from the public?
Yes.
All right. Dan Albrecht, would you like to unmute and share your question?
Sure, Dan Albrecht from Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. The inventory work for the road erosion inventory assessment, two things. How do you propose to allocate the funds? And then secondly, CCRPC, we wouldn't need any of that $1 million only because we can use our MPO transportation planning dollars to cover it like we have in the past. So that's it.
Thank you, Dan. The current proposal would be that those dollars would be appropriated to the Agency of Transportation and be administered as grants to municipalities through the Municipal Mitigation Assistance Program. I believe Joel Perigo may be on the line if there's any additional context that he would like to share.
Okay, just to follow up, well, I guess I'll save it for comments.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Hand in the room, Doug.
Oh, hand in the room.
Yep.
Andrea, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
have, we're from Lake Carmi and we're very interested in alum treatment. Is that line item for just Lake Carmi? Is that an amount that's to be shared with other lakes that we know are also looking for that treatment?
Did you hear the question, folks online?
Yes, so the proposal would be for those dollars to go to help implement the Lake Carmi alum treatment pending the results of the feasibility study and permitting. So that's what is baked into the clean water budget proposal for state fiscal year 25. Secretary Moore, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
No, we're looking at other possible sources, recognizing that may not be sufficient for but at the same, like trying to strike that balance of not wanting to set aside too much money, absent knowing what the feasibility study is going to turn out, and then also knowing there's interest in Lake Moray. But I think we've identified another funding route for that particular feasibility or that. No. No.
Excellent. Not that we wouldn't want to.
Right. Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see a question in the chat from Peter Lafley. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Does the Clean Water Board have any legislative protection to the unallocated surplus from one year to the next?
I can take that. So generally speaking, special fund balances like the Clean Water Fund are going to be retained, but there's nothing preventing a General Assembly from reverting funds from the Clean Water Fund. I mean, General Assemblies cannot bind future General Assemblies, so conventionally there is a relatively high degree of protection there, but there's no certainty that the legislature can't decide to use that money for something else.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. So we are just a few minutes over schedule with this agenda item. So Doug, would you like to move on to the next agenda item? And then we can save any remaining comments or questions for public comment.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I will hand it over to Colleen Miller, who is our program's ARPA coordinator, American Rescue Plan Act coordinator. And Colleen is helping to support our public comment communication. So we're going to report out to the board now an overview of our plan for public comment and associated communications. Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Emily. So as she just said, I'm going to be talking about what our public comment period will look like once it's launched. So our goal is to have the public weigh in on decisions that the board is making. The way that we're doing that is by providing them with educational resources and also asking for their opinion. So I'm going to start by highlighting a few important dates. The public comment period this year is from October 20th to November 20th. And the public hearing will be held on November 2nd, and that's going to be at 2:30. To stay informed with the Clean Water Board process, if you haven't already, please sign up for the listserv. That will provide you with a bunch of great reminders about meetings in the future. So I'm going to highlight quickly some of the available materials for the public. So these are all available on our Clean Water Board webpage. The first is the Clean Water Budget Spreadsheet, which will show the amount that's given to each line item for fiscal year 2025. The Clean Water Budget Overview is a PDF that provides a lot of information about the Clean Water Fund, the Clean Water Budget, and the board line item summaries. The Clean Water Budget Story Map is a user-friendly and accessible summary of clean water funding and the Clean Water Board process. And then the recorded presentations about each line item will be available. We did this last year. It just allows the November 2nd public meeting to prioritize feedback and go a little quicker. And then we will take public opinion into account 3 ways. The first is through an online questionnaire. The second is through written submission to our email, and then at the public hearing on November 2nd. So this is page 7, I believe, in your meeting document. So this is the first page of the Clean Water Budget Overview. So this is kind of houses all of the information that we have for the Clean Water Budget FY25. So all of these other materials are branched off of this document. And so this is a table that is in that overview as well as in our story map. We just wanted to highlight flood resilience co-benefits given the flooding this past summer. So this shows some co-benefits by land use of some of the projects that we work on with the Clean Water Board. Okay, so the story map The last year was the first year that we did the story map, and we thought that it was quite successful. So just to note, the questionnaire and the overview document are both linked with the story map. So it provides a very user-friendly, accessible way for the public to get experience and learn about both the Clean Water Board process and just clean water in Vermont in general. So we break it up and have a lot of images, tables, videos. And so it talks about trends in clean water funding, the board process, specific line items, and the questionnaire is embedded at the end of this document so they can comment right after learning about the process. So that leads me to the questionnaire. So the questionnaire is separated out into two sections. The first is asking for specific feedback on the allocation and prioritization of funds, and the second is on feedback on participant demographics. So we start by asking the respondent if they agree with the general allocation of funds, and they can write in specific feedback about funding level. And then the next part is asking about priority tier allocation. So as Gianna mentioned earlier, we have our different allocation by tier. So that's explained in this section in case the public might not understand that. So we ask them about tier funding as well as specific line items within the tier, their feedback on that information. Okay, and then part two is the demographics. So that's requesting that participants share their thoughts on how to improve the public comment process in the future and how to make the experience better for the people who are filling out the survey. And it also includes questions about how they specifically heard about the questionnaire and how we can improve any of our communications in the future. So a little information about the public hearing. Again, it's on November 2nd at 2:30. So 2:30 to 3:10, we'll start off by showing the clean water budget line item presentations. So we will recommend that the public actually watches these presentations beforehand. They will be available online, but we wanted to make sure that they were also shown during this presentation so there was equal access in case people didn't have the opportunity to do that beforehand. So then during this section, we'll do a background of the clean water budget and board process, the approach to the SFY25 budget, and an overview of the public comment process. So that leaves 3:10 to 4 o'clock open for public comment. So the board will be present and will be available to listen to any comments from the public. Finally, how we're getting this information out there to the public is through a few ways: a press release and the DEC social media team, the listserv, which I mentioned earlier. We have lots of information on the Clean Water Board webpage. We have the DEC calendar advertising these meetings, and then finally, agency partners are assisting us in publicizing information. So that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions on communications?
Thank you, Colleen. Any questions? Great. Okay, well, if there are any questions on the communications plan, some of the communications tools and the online questionnaire, we can move on. I see a question in the chat from Jared Carpenter. So just to confirm, comments are due November 20th. Yes, the public comment period will run 30 days from October 20th to November 20th. And comments are due November 20th at 4 p.m., I believe is our deadline there. And we will be working to get the word out about all of the deadlines, the process, ways to provide comment as we approach that October 20th launch. Thank you, Jared. Okay. So Doug, our next item on the agenda is the update from Neil on the federal funds report. And I was just wondering if it would make sense to cover public comment first, just to make sure we have enough time to get through everybody, because Neil and I talked ahead of time, and if needed, this one could be deferred to the December board meeting. Just wondering if that would work, knowing we're roughly 5 minutes behind schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's defer that until after If we don't get time to it today, either put it on December or send it out to the board members in between meetings if it's more of an awareness item.
That works great. Thank you. It is linked in the agenda, and we'll make sure that board members also receive a copy of the PDF. Okay, so we're moving into the public comment portion of the agenda. Doug, I have the list of folks who RSVP'd to comment. Would you like me to run through the list? Or how would you like to approach that?
Yes, but let's just address Jill's question from the chat before we move into that, since we did open it up and ask people to start questioning.
Okay, so Jill Arachi has a question in the chat. I know the state of Vermont has been working hard to develop and count measures of water quality improvements. Have you gotten far enough to do ROI analysis of these investments? I apologize, I'm not sure. Oh, return on investment.
Return on investment.
Thank you. Hi, Jill. Thank you for your question. Each year, we compile across state government and with some federal partners all of our investments in clean water, and we take a results-based accountability approach to track performance measures that are tied to those investments, as well as the results of our regulatory programs in compelling clean water actions. So the annual performance report that we publish is the best resource to learn about the results of these investments. And there's also an online dashboard where those data can be explored. And we are using that to track our progress with regard to implementing some of our longer term water quality goals that are articulated in total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs. But if there's more that you'd like me to dive into on that question, I'd be happy to follow up with you offline.
All right, thanks for addressing that, Emily. Now we can move into the people that registered ahead of time.
Okay, and this is our typical practice is we try to limit each public comment to 2 minutes to ensure that everybody has a chance to voice their comments. And if we receive any written comments, we'll make sure that those get attached to the meeting minutes afterwards. So we have folks who RSVP'd ahead of time to sign up to public comment. The first on the list, and we'll just be keeping track of the time here. First on the list is Albert Perry. I believe Albert is here. Let's see. Albert, if you called in, you can mute and unmute using *6. I'm just scanning through the list though, and I do not see that they are on the meeting with us. Okay. So perhaps we'll move to the next, and if they're able to rejoin, we can hear from them. All right, next is Bruce McGurk. Bruce,
yes,
hi.
Thank you, Emily. You can hear me, I see from the smile. Yes, I'm with the Lake Carmi Campers Association, and I wanted to express our gratitude to the board for the funding of the alum feasibility study. This August and September were really gruesome months at Lake Carmi. It's having an effect on people, animals, and the economy in the area. So we are excited to get the results of the alum feasibility and encouraged that there is money being pushed out into 2025. I'm afraid it's going to be expensive. So we will definitely need funds from wherever we can get them. But it's a permanent fix, we hope, and that would mean that lake would drop off the lake in crisis roster. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, Bruce. Okay. I see next on the list is Dan Albrecht.
Thank you, members of the board. Dan Albrecht, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Mostly just 2 comments. One, the first one would be the grants and aid program. We and all the municipalities and the regional planning commissions we've all found this program to be very valuable, and probably the reason it's most valuable is it's very simple. The towns get an allocation of money based upon mileage, and it's pretty straightforward in terms of take a picture ahead of time, take a picture after the project, and there's not not a lot of extra paperwork, excuse me, to get it done. So that's a great model, and to the extent you can keep doing that, that'd be great. That may be a good model to do on the inventory funding as well too, if there's a way to do that as well too, and then encourage collaboration with the RPCs, because I know some RPCs, just like we do, help our towns do the inventory. Some towns may do them themselves, so any kind of coordination ahead of time would be appreciated. And lastly, we as CCRPC are the Basin 5 clean water service provider. So we've been working very closely with Emily and Neil and Chris Rotler and others. We appreciate the collaborative spirit and sort of trust in this regionalization model. We're still working our way through it and building relationships, but the money is getting out the door and projects are being identified. We personally in Basin 5 hope to have some constructed next summer, but there is sort of this ramp up period. There perhaps were not as many shovel ready projects ready to go right away this summer and stuff. But rest assured, we and the other clean water service providers are building relationships and getting funding out the door, and hopefully things will come to fruition soon in terms of actual projects being constructed. So that's about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for your comment. Next on the list, I have Lake Carmi Campers Association. I think either Ernie, John, or Peter were planning to speak. Which one of you would like to take the lead?
I will, okay. I will start.
Thank you, Ernie.
Sure. Ernie Engelhardt, I'm on the board of directors of the Lake Carmi Campus Association. Andrew and I have had a camp there for a lot of years. And first, we want to thank the board very much for all of the support. There have been a lot of days and a lot of weeks over the last few years when there's not been a lot of hope among some of the campers and the townspeople for Lake Carmi. And all the efforts that you folks have made, along with the help from ANR, the AFM, and AFM, have been really, really helpful in lifting our spirits that we can move forward and have a clean lake. That's certainly much appreciated. So thanks to the board and to all others who have helped us out. A previous commenter said the lake, I think his name was Bruce, sent it, the information very well for us. I did want to mention one thing, the continued emphasis on potential health benefits to the campers and to the townspeople. The town of Franklin has a state park, one of the best ones in the state, and it also has a lake. Very two fortunate resources for recreation for the town, as well as campers and others. It's discouraging when we see that a lot of the people from the town and just aren't able to use the lake. I guess in regard to that, the issue of public health has been brought up several times, and I guess I'd like to save to end by saying what our younger grandson said last year. He was up here for a short visit because of the condition. He said, "This lake stinks." And that stayed with me. So thanks again for all of your support. We're looking forward to the results of the study that's underway, and hopefully we will get a alum treatment or other suitable practice that will really help clear the lake up. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ernie. Just want to check if others from the Lake Carmi Campers Association wanted to speak. Pete Benevento, I think you came on camera, so I just wanted
Yes.
to check if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yes, I just want to reiterate what both Bruce McGurk and both Ernie Engelhardt have just said. The conditions of the lake this year just made it very, very unhealthy and quite frankly, at points unlivable. Ernie mentioned that his grandson spoke about the stink. Well, we can send you a photo journal to give you a good idea of what the lake looked like this year. But unfortunately, we can't capture the smell, the odor, which is absolutely terrible. So again, thank you for your efforts in helping us and funding us. We look forward to the alum, to the outcome or the recommendations of the alum feasibility study. At this point, we look at alum as our only saving grace to save the lake. And it is the fourth largest inland lake in Vermont. And at this point, it is not sustainable. So we need to keep the funding flowing to help Lake Carmi. And we appreciate everything that you've done for us. And we look forward to continue working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. John Costa, did you want to share any remarks as well? I saw you were listed to.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, thank you, Emily. Just a couple of quick points. I had other things prepared, but some people have covered that. What I want to add to this is for the first time this year, besides the horrific conditions of the lake, we had a very, very serious aquatic life kill, where thousands of clams, mussels, and crayfish were killed, and most of them ended up on the shore of that North Beach. So that's a first for us on that lake. Otherwise, we've talked about the serious health concerns. We haven't talked about the devaluation of property values that represent significant income to the state and the town of Franklin, nor the tourism revenue losses to the state and the region abutting Lake Carmi. Ernie mentioned the state park. That is the state's largest park in view of sites. That would go away possibly too. And then lastly is further acceleration of cyanobacteria blooms in Lake Champlain, a major issue because we feed that lake at some point in time. So fixing Lake Carmi also helps address part of the Lake Champlain problem. I want to reiterate everybody's thanks to Secretary Moore for including that $750,000 in the budget. It's about half the original sum of the estimates we're seeing to do some kind of treatment, but we're excited to see the results of the feasibility study, and hopefully we'll see a fix in 2024, not 2025. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your comment. Okay, moving down the list. Next up is Marguerite Adelman.
Hi, my name is Marguerite Edelman. I'm the coordinator of the Vermont PFAS Military Poisons Coalition. And today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'm reminded that here in Vermont, we live on the traditional and unceded home of the Abenaki. These lands and waters have been a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous people for thousands of years, and we must strive to continue to respect and protect this land and these sacred waters. Today's meeting about the budget is concerning to me for a number of reasons, and first and foremost, I just think there's not enough money set aside for the board's mission to reduce pollution entering waters and to protect and restore water quality. And I'm especially concerned about PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or forever chemicals in drinking water, groundwater, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, sludge, and industrial discharges. I'm not going to read everything I prepared. I'll go ahead and send it in. But in terms of Testing, we didn't really begin testing for PFAS in drinking water until 2020. So it's, in some cases, it's really hard to fathom how long we've lived with this particular problem. And the owners of private wells must test for PFAS themselves, and those tests are not cheap. I really would like to know where and what money is being spent by the Clean Water Board in the area of PFAS. I looked over the reports and I could not find a lot of concrete information in that area. So I'm worried about what will happen when the EPA lowers the drinking water standards even more, from 70 parts per trillion, which was their recommendation, down considerably to 4 parts per trillion for 2 forms of PFAS, and a combination of a health index for other forms of PFAS. And here in Vermont, we regulate at 20 parts per trillion. PFAS is extremely toxic. It's like cyanobacteria, which concerns me greatly as well. We need to be working diligently. It's going to cost so much more to clean up our water and our groundwater. Thank you.
Thank you, Marguerite, for your comment. Okay, and next on the list for a comment is Lindsay Waterhouse. Hi, Lindsay.
Hello there. Wanted to thank you, first of all, for taking my question. My concern is a little bit like Jill's earlier question that was in the chat. And I think that I also wanted to basically give praise for the $300,000 increase provided to DEC looking at the flooding piece. I really applaud that. I think that they do a fantastic job, and I know that that will greatly impact the waters of the state as a result of their work, or as a result of the flooding this year. So, but what I wanted to do is I just wanted to talk about your the overall approach. I love what you've done in terms of the budgeting process. I like the approach of planning and doing, but the other two pieces is where my concern is. Looking at a quality circle, planning, doing, checking, and then acting. And so again, going back to Jill's question, her focus talked about what is the results of our doing? What is the results of the impact of all of the monies that we're putting into the process? I find a relatively large gap looking at monitoring quantitative analysis to be able to feed back. I looked at your 2022 projections where you had met all of your goals, but they're theoretical, especially in terms of TMDL and the impact of phosphorus. So my question is there going to be a mechanism to be able to analyze the data and try to provide actual input? So if the monies that we're funding over the 20-year projected period can be modified or somehow adapted to improve the process rather than just use the theoretical model.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate your comment. Be happy to follow up offline if that would be helpful to speak a little bit more to our performance report and our tracking and accountability process, and also some of the planning tools that we use to help support some of the adaptive management that you mentioned, if that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, I believe that covers the list of folks who had signed up ahead of time for public comment. And that leaves us just about 5 minutes for the board to discuss and act on the draft state fiscal year 25 clean water budget. So Doug, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, if you had intended to raise your hand, hadn't signed up and intended to raise your hand, please let us know and we can make sure that you're on the agenda for the early on in the next public comment period. So we'll have a couple of minutes of discussion of the draft budget. And I would just point out to members of the board that you know, we didn't leave much time for discussion here. But this is just the draft, and we're putting it up for the public to comment on. So it is by no means, you know, a final committed action at this point in time. So any members of the board have questions or anything they'd like to throw out there for the budget? Bob?
Yeah, I appreciate the approach on this. I think it is reasoned, and I'm comfortable making a motion to approve the posting of the draft budget to move along with the process.
Do we have a second?
I would second that, Doug.
All right. I always forget. Do we do voice votes or we move through the roster on this one, Emily?
Whichever approach, typically we say, are there any objections or questions? And then
All right.
if not, then all in favor. Aye.
All right. All right. Any objections to moving forward with the motion? All right. Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Nay. All right. The motion passes. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the comments from the members of the public, and I would like to thank all the members of the board who were able to attend today. I do think this has been an extremely valuable process over the years. I do know that there's a lot of complexity that does really come out in the performance report that Emily has referenced that doesn't necessarily happen here in front of the board. So I do think that's an important report to read. I definitely review it every year because there's a lot of really valuable information in there. But I would say this is an incredibly complex subject, and you know, it's not something where you can make straight line predictions. There are a lot of variables. It's a very complex aspect, and just like I think it was Adelaide, I believe, pointed out that, you know, we continue to have new things come into the picture, and PFAS is, of course, something that's been gaining a lot more understanding and attention over the last couple of years. So it's not something where we can let our guard down, and I appreciate that the members of the board continue to work with us on this. So this point, and I'm really procedurally just a mess today. I'm just going to adjourn. I'm not even going to take a motion to adjourn. I'm going to adjourn the Clean Water Board today. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm happy to take it.